SJ. Welcome to Mvskoke Radio, your weekly source for tribal and community news, interesting guests and discussions, plus a local events calendar. SJ, Stone Go, Gary Five, Jaho Jeff Geddos, Mvskoke Radio, Mabo Wedge. Welcome to our program again here as the fall season rolls into Okmulgee. We have a couple things we'll be sharing with you today. First of all, we have members of our Lighthorse Police force. We have the Chief, Chief Wind coming in, who's in studio with us today. And also, on the phone, we have Mr. Jeffrey Frank. Are you there, sir?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. And we have Chief Wind here. We will also be sharing in the second half some of the opportunities for business loans due to the things that are affecting us as nations. Joining me in the studio also is my colleague, Morgan Taylor. It's Gary Frank. What's new in your end of the world?
Oh, just a lot going on with COVID and things that we're doing in the tribe, CARES Act funding.
The usual kind of
yes.
thing. Well,
the new norm.
Weird way of thinking of it, but it's job security, I guess. Well, thank you, Chief Wind, Mr. Frank, for coming in. I understand now that you are seeing some of the results of the focus on law and order and things that are happening now, trying to perhaps bridge some of the gap created by McGirt and other challenges facing us. So, first of all, how's Lighthorse doing in light of all the new challenges here?
Lighthorse is doing very good, maintaining our job of protecting the nation, all the communities within. I'm very proud of the officers, the men and women of the department, our dispatchers, our administrative staff for really stepping up and continue taking care of business.
Okay, now with this new money, first of all, how much did you get, and was it earmarked?
Now, back in July, Council passed a appropriation for Lighthorse that allowed us to hire 39 more staff, 20 officers, 10 investigators, 6 dispatchers, and 2 captains and a records clerk. We've needed every cent of that. We need every one of those positions. Mm-hmm. When McGirt hit, we realized, we're going to have to add on definitely a lot more staff. And so that really helped us scratch the surface of what we're needing. Obviously, we're going to need more officers. But like I said, we were very blessed to receive what we did.
Now, you mentioned 20 new officers, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Does that fill a gap, or does it add on to what you've got now?
It will be adding on. I should also add that we were fortunate to get a COPS grant through the Department of Justice for an additional 5 officers. And so we'll be adding 25 officers onto the street. We're also going through that hiring process at this time for them. But it's adding on to what we need, and we've always needed more officers. So it's really, like I said, it's been a help in being able to add on, because when McGirt came about, we realized that obviously we're going to have to grow as far as officers in the field, but we're also going to have to grow in our internal programs, such as our training, our SORNA, which is our sex offender registration officers, game rangers, just across the board. We're going to have to add more officers and more staff to them. So again, like I said, this was definitely scratching the surface, but it's come in handy.
Now, Mr. Jeffrey Frank, now you are the communications supervisor, is that correct, sir?
Yes, sir, that is correct.
Okay, now with this new money, new challenges and things facing us, what kind of load does that put on you? What kind of job do you have to do now?
Well, with the passing of McGirt, we have definitely increased our call volume. I would say on an average day, we were probably handling between 200 to 300 calls. That's 24-hour period. Now we're looking at close to around 1,100 calls a day. Now the officers may not receive all those calls. The dispatchers are doing their due diligence and handling the calls. Some that can be worked out with the dispatchers, and free up the officer for perhaps another call. But yes, our call volume has definitely increased.
Oh my gosh. Well, does this or has it been worked out where there is or isn't a conflict now between, say, Tulsa Police and Lighthorse, or Creek County Sheriff, or Okmulgee Police? Or have you got those things set up to where now there are agreements or what do they call it?
Cross-deputization agreements.
Yeah, thank you.
We've actually had cross-deputization agreements for many, many years. With Tulsa PD, we've had cross-deputization agreements in place since 2005. Prior to McGirt, we had 33 or 34 cross-deputization agreements already in place. Since McGirt, a lot of departments have reached out to us, and we've reached out to them. And there are departments that we hadn't even considered prior to McGirt with cross-deputization. But that cross-deputization kind of fills in that if there's any void as far as any law enforcement. And so those have come in very handy, even more so since McGirt. I had mentioned that on the cross-deputization agreements, prior to McGirt, we were focusing on the counties and the cities within our jurisdiction. Since McGirt, we've come to realize that we also have to cross-deputize with like school police, college, university. I've reached out to TU, which they have a security, but I've made contact with them. The OU campus in Tulsa, the OSU campus here in town, here in Okmulgee. And like I said, even the Beggs School Police, we're cross-deputized with them right now.
What happens under these existing agreements when, say, an officer in Tulsa at River Spirit has to handle something going on in the parking lot? And we've heard of a lot of stupid, silly things happening out there. So what happens? Do Tulsa Police respond because they're closer, or do you have officers stationed there? So what happens?
So particularly in Tulsa, we try to keep an officer stationed at River Spirit because they have it's a small town, so you have a pretty good sized call volume there in itself. But when our we're divided into two districts. We have a northern district at this time, and then the southern district. Basically, the northern district is from 16 on up. Our southern district is from Henrietta on down south. So in the instance in Tulsa, what we're able to do is, and it's not as complicated as many may think. Basically what happens is, say we don't have an officer at River Spirit, something happens, we can call Tulsa PD. The moment that we give them a call, they take off their Tulsa PD cap and they put on their Lighthorse hat. And so they're working as a light horseman, so that helps, that fills in that gap. So whether they're Stajati or Stahetki, that Tulsa officer will be able to deal with them. Mm-hmm. And it works both ways. So one of our officers sees an incident in downtown Tulsa by BOK. That officer can take off his Lighthorse hat, put on his TPD hat, because we have that cross commission, and he's able to handle it that way. So again, it's filling in that gap.
I had a question.
Just a second here. Try that one again.
So say a person, I don't know, can y'all hear me?
Yeah, there we go. We got it.
Okay. So say a person has like an emergency call and they're on the reservation. So they call 911. How would that go jurisdiction-wise? They call 911, and then how does the separation of and law enforcement go?
So 911 will still follow their protocol. They'll dispatch whoever whatever county, city they're in. So that officer gets there, realize, he asks, as he's trained to, are you Native American? Are you non-Native American? That will give him the direction on how to proceed from there. Now, like I said, with the cross-deputization agreement, and we'll say it's Tulsa again. Tulsa PD can go ahead and handle it, but they would still call us, and we would still respond. That's one of the mandates of our department is anytime a citizen calls, we're going to respond. But so in that case with 911, the city officer would show up, figure out which jurisdiction he needs to run with, and then take it in that direction. Now, in the instance of something that falls under the Major Crimes Act, such as rape, murder, things along that line, not only would they notify Lighthorse, but they would in turn notify the FBI, or we would notify the FBI. So again, that cross-deputization agreement really does make things a lot seamless.
Okay, Mr. Frank, now with a huge job to do here, there looks like there would be plenty of room for confusion and people getting their wires crossed and things like that. So as a communications supervisor, how do you put this message across where both police forces and I guess the general public understand what's going on?
Well, like Mr. Wind explained, the officer is sent out to that residence or to that location, and once they, get to talking to the individual and find out, if they're Stajati or not, in turn, they can call us, and if they are a Mvskoke citizen, we can verify, even after hours, if they are a Mvskoke citizen. Our great IT department in citizenship has developed a program to where our dispatchers are able to go and look at that information and determine whether they're a Creek citizen or not. Now, there are times that we may have to call a different tribe and speak to their law enforcement, or if they have programs set up, then they can also verify if they let us know if they're, say, they're Cherokee or Choctaw, Chickasaw. Then those other agencies have worked well with us. At the beginning, it was a little bit of confusion, but things have really leveled out and maintained, and we're working well with one another now, and we're able to determine if a subject, I wouldn't say subject, but an individual is of a federally recognized tribe. And we're able to go from there.
Excuse me.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, have you gentlemen run across situations where you run into a lot of fakes? People saying, the old Cherokee grandmother kind of thing?
We actually,
Yes.
that's something that's just been part of our law enforcement for us in general, way before McGirt. Again, say up at River Spirit, we go to arrest someone, and of course our first question is, are you Native American? Can you prove it? When they say I am Native American, at that point, prior to McGirt, we would say, okay, well, we would bring them to jail down here in Okmulgee, and then they would get to court the next morning and say, nope, I'm not Native American. So that doesn't cause a problem. What we do is we take any evidence, anything that we've gathered during the commission of that crime, package it up, and send it and the individual back up to, for instance, in Tulsa, and then Tulsa would pick it up and deal with them at their level.
Would their assertion of being a tribal member actually work against them then if they're not? Could that be brought up as an extra charge in court or something?
It could be.
A little thin.
Yeah, a little thin, but yeah, it could be. Now, I've been mentioning that our officers are trained. It's just part of our protocol that when we come up on someone to question them or regarding a crime, we ask them, are you Native American? And so we're used to doing that. One of the things that we've done, that we're training, or teaching, I should say, not training, but teaching our counterparts on the state side, is to do the same thing. For them, it's a lot different. Lighthorse, we've been doing this since 2003, so it's part of what we naturally do. But for our outside partners, that's something totally new for them, and so they're getting used to that. But since McGirt, one of the things that we stress to them is to make sure that you get some sort of identification. Jeff had just mentioned, we're able to pull up our tribal citizens. Our dispatchers can pull that up on the computer. Well, as he mentioned, we can make phone calls to other tribes and do the same thing on the phone. Most of the other 4 tribes usually have dispatchers on duty where we can call and say, hey, do you have so-and-so here? Are they enrolled? And they yay or nay. Mm-hmm. Now with other tribes, say other tribes within Oklahoma or outside, we have a form. Jeff has created a form that they can send out to these other tribes. Of course, verification might not come until the next morning, but at least that's our attempt in finding out. Now, obviously, one thing we're hoping is that if they are enrolled with a federally recognized tribe, is that they have their citizenship card. That makes things a lot easier for everybody.
Let me ask you this one, kind of an odd question. Now, I've heard both you and Mr. Frank use, Stajati, Staheki. Do you actually teach Tulsa Police perhaps a couple of Creek words here and there, or have they asked? Has it ever come into play?
I know the Riverside Division, which is just down the road from River Spirit Casino. I have a couple of buddies that are over there. Yeah, they do ask. That's something as simple as don't go, how's your day? Something like that, which, that may be all they know, but at least it shows some respect that they're willing to learn, maybe even this is just a couple words.
Mm-hmm. How about things like Humbuck's J?
I think everyone knows that one.
Everyone knows that one. All right.
I think I have a couple of friends of mine that I've grown up with that are also at Tulsa PD or Tulsa County, and I know had one of them call me last week, and he was out with a guy, and I guess guy was fibbing to him, and he just laughed, bruh. He goes, quit my phone. I turned around and looked at him. He's like, well, I guess you got me.
Now, did I hear "buh" get in there? Yeah, you're speaking Kiowa now.
So, I have a question. So what kind of happens in the reverse situation, like we were talking about, like, say a tribal cop can you guys pull over somebody who's non-native or arrest somebody who's non-native? Because
we are on the reservation, we would be considered the primary law enforcement. Because we have, one, because of the reservation status, but two, just to solidify that, we also have cross deputization agreements, allow us to do that as well. So those cross deputization agreements actually give us a little backup if we ever need it. So regarding the cross deputization agreements that we have in effect right now, we have 57 or 58 altogether. And you wouldn't think that there's that many agencies just within our jurisdiction, but as I mentioned, reaching out to the colleges, the school police, even the VA hospital, we have an MOU in works with them. So anyone who basically carries a gun, a badge, and a commission of some sort, we are commissioning with them. I publish that on our Facebook page. We have a Facebook page where we publish different stories, updates, things like that regarding what's going on. We share information from other jurisdictions. Maybe they're looking for someone. We'll post that on there. We also have a Twitter feed, so we're excuse me. So we're also on Twitter. So I recently published the cross deputization agreements that we have in place. And like I said, there's a lot more than most people would believe. We are. You mentioned in your question about pulling people over. We are cross deputized with the Highway Patrol, so that gives us that authority on the highways, even though the highway is obviously running through our.
So a lot of transparency on both sides.
Yes, definitely.
question now pops up if you're in that situation where you've pulled someone over, and I can still imagine people saying, well, I'm not Indian, you don't have any authority over me. You're still hearing that kind of thing, and how do you respond?
I've had a couple. What we've been doing, myself, my staff, Deputy Chief North Cross and Captain Bear, and a couple of the other captains, we've gone face to face with all these agencies. We've gone to their place to visit with them, and so through those encounters, they're telling us, yeah, they still get that as well. As far as our officers, I haven't heard anyone, but I'm sure obviously someone's tried to say that. I know there was a incident up 69. One of our officers pulled over a vehicle because of the way they were driving. The vehicle was from Texas. The driver had said, well, you don't have jurisdiction over me, and when the officer informed him that you were on the reservation, the driver understood that and conformed, and that settled things. So yeah, it definitely does happen.
I think a lot of people don't realize that it has really supposed to have been this way the whole time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Oh yeah, I definitely agree. And obviously, we get a lot of good feedback from tribal members and non-tribal members who say the same thing. Even chiefs of police that I've spoken with are saying this is the right decision. This is how it should be. So we are getting a lot of feel goods from that.
One of the things that you're going to be doing with this new money and support is recruiting new officers. Is that right? So what are you looking for, and what should someone, what qualifications should they have if they are interested in becoming an officer?
So I mentioned the appropriation that we got from the National Council that allowed for 20 patrol officers. I also mentioned the grant that we received from COPS for five additional officers. What my intention is with the 5 additional that we received through the COPS grant, I am looking for Mvskoke citizens to fill those spots specifically. I'm going to be reaching out to the tribal college because of their police science program, or their criminal justice program, and what we're looking for, obviously someone over the age of 21 with a good background, no felony convictions, no domestic violence convictions, or even anything relating to domestic violence. Traffic tickets are fine. And someone who is specifically with this grant who will be able to attend the Indian Police Academy out in Artesia, New Mexico, which is a 3-month program. So they would have to be able to do that. So what I'm looking for as far as from the students, and like I said, I'm looking for Mvskoke specifically for this. Those qualifications, and most importantly, and probably this is the most important thing, is that willingness to serve our people, no matter what the conditions are. No, this isn't. I'm not looking for someone who just wants a job. I want someone who has that dedication to our tribe, that they're willing to work night shift, work whatever's called upon them to do. First and foremost, as Lighthorse, our job is to protect our people, is to look after our interest. One of the things that I looked at is even how to structure our department. When we were getting ready for McGirt, we went out to Navajo Res. I went out to Seminole Nation Res in Florida, just to see how they do theirs. But when I came back and I actually took a tour through our council house, I saw how they had historically structured the department. And that was a captain, a sergeant, and then so many officers. I think it was like 10 officers. That's what I want to do with our department, is get us back to our roots. Yes, we have the technology. We have wonderful equipment. We have a great benefit package. We have all these things to offer. but we want to offer that to the right person, to the right candidate.
Now, when we look at this, we have to think, well, if somebody said, well, I'd kind of like to be a cop, but going to Tulsa would be too hard. I could always be a tribal police officer. Forget it now. Your standards and requirements are just the same as any other law enforcement agency?
More so, because the training that we're looking at, and nothing against the state training. The state training is very good. But because of our mission, because of what we're called to do, we look to that federal training, which is a little bit more intense, and that's why we send them out to Artesia. It's paramilitary, so if you can get used to getting yelled at and getting up early in the morning and getting marched to chow, then that's who we're looking for, because that shows that dedication. Like I said, I'm looking for someone who wants to get into this career, not just a job.
Right. Well, I still hate getting up in the morning, so I guess even to do these radio shows, I've been doing them all my life.
One of the things that I will offer is we have a reserve officer program, and that would be something for an individual who thinks that this is what they want to get into. They still have to go through training. It's basically a 6-month training, but it gives them a taste of what it would be like to be a full-time officer. So we do, and we have the same standards to be a reserve officer, because we invest a lot of money, time, effort, and energy into our people. So again, we want someone who's really interested in that, in doing that.
And I would presume in those reserve or apprentice officer positions, you're going to be real careful about firearms training and things.
Everything. The reserve program, as far as the training, isn't any different than what we expect of our full-time officers.
And along those same lines, if somebody is interested in getting into law enforcement, I'm still looking for individuals to hire for communications, for dispatch. So that's one step that they could take. They could come in, apply, and get hired on, and say after about a year or so, they decide, I think I want to try it. I want to be an officer. That's another avenue that it can take. And like Chief Wind has mentioned, we're looking for career individuals, not somebody that's just looking for a job to get a paycheck every other week. But that's just another option that they can take, is come through dispatch. And see if they like it or not.
Well, let me ask you, while we're on that subject, forgive me for interrupting you there, but
okay.
The dispatch person is always the first voice you hear when you call Lighthorse.
Yes.
So what qualifications or requirements are involved in something like that?
As far as qualifications, looking at least for a high school graduate, equivalent GED, 18 years of age. Same thing, no criminal background, no domestics, speeding tickets. Once again, they're fine. It's something that that might get looked at and just like, hey, it looks like you like to speed, but kind of laugh it off a little bit. But at the same time, like I said, we're looking for somebody that's possibly wanting to become an officer. It's not for everybody. I've been doing this for almost 11 years. When I first got into this, that was my intention. About a year or so, I'm going to transfer it over. I want to be a police officer. Well, once I got in there, I really fell in love with the job, to be honest with you. And I did consider about 5 years ago becoming an officer, but my department needed me where I was. And, I accepted the challenge and ran with it. And I'm grateful for the opportunities that I've been given. And I have a few that's been doing this for a while. I have one of my dispatchers, as a matter of fact, she's been doing it for over 30 years.
Oh my!
And she's loved it, and and she's pretty much my right hand. Helps me with the new people and gets them acclimated with how we do things. They may come from a different agency, and whenever they come to work for us, and how different it is from, say, city or state agency come to tribal. And just a little bit variances, and she's been very, very helpful with that. And right now we're still looking to hire 4 more individuals that that if they're interested, then come check us out.
Well, let me jump in there with this. Obviously, they've got to have some education, some background, this kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But when as a dispatcher, when you get a call, there's more involved than just what's the crime, where you at, the basic facts. It seems like you might have to use some perception there and kind of
Yes.
reading the person or the situation.
Yes, I mean, and it takes a strong person to do this position because, like you said, we're the first to receive this call, and there's times that we've gotten calls, and we've gotten out to the officers, and we never hear the ending of it. We don't know what happened. I mean, it might be a day or so before we talk to that officer and find out, hey, this is what happened, whether good or bad. Sometimes we're almost like social workers. We sit there and we just talk to people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, they call in, they may have, issues or problems, and it's something that we can take care of, just talk to them. Maybe, if it's after hours, like, I can get you help, and I can, forward this information on to you, and just simple things like that. A lot of times we still send our officer out there to check on them, but yeah, it takes a strong person to be able to, strong-minded person, shall I say, to be able to do this position because, like you said, we're gathering the pertinent information. Like I said, there's time we're social workers.
Yeah.
And then we gather all that information, get an officer, headed that way, and you just got to be patient with some people.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll tell you what, we're going to have to wrap up this segment, gentlemen.
Okay.
Are there any final thoughts that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Yes, as I mentioned, we're recruiting. We have one of our captains, Captain Leland Bear, is our recruiting officer at this moment. So if you have any more questions, you can give him a call at our dispatch, and our dispatch number is 918-732-7800 or 918-732-7850, and he'll be able to help you along. Captain Bear has been with this department for many, many years, so he's very familiar with who we're looking for. Also, before I finish, I wanted to mention one of the ways that we have gathered or hired some of our officers and some of our dispatchers is we have a youth program, the Explorers program. And what they do is from age 14 to the time they turn 21, they can come join our group, and it's open to anybody. And they learn law enforcement. They take trainings. They learn how to do traffic stops. All the advisors are members of our department, so they're law enforcement officers who are leading this, and we're always looking for new recruits for our Explorers program. Our Explorers program do a lot of community service. It looks great on a college resume, and it looks good on a job resume. So I just wanted to throw that out there as well.
Okay, Mr. Frank?
Besides hiring for dispatchers, we're also going to be starting a surveillance department that is actually going to be watching the CCTVs that will be on campus, and we will be hiring from 6 to 8 individuals for those positions. As soon as we get that up and running, we're just at the beginning stages of that.
All right, gentlemen, thank you so much, Chief Wind, Mr. Franks, for making time in your schedule and joining us here on the program and letting us know how Lighthorse is doing. We're here if you have got something in the future and you might want a little bit of help or promotion. We'll see what we can do for you.
Mado, we appreciate the time.
All right, we're going to take a short pause here, and then we'll be back with some discussion on some business loans and being available now. So our good friend Morgan will be handling that one. So stay with us here on Mvskoke Radio here on the Brew.
Who am I? Am I native? I don't want people assuming things because I'm Indian. I just want to be me. But how do I live in two worlds? Some guys just check out by doing meth. But that ain't for me. Because I see my family, my friends, my drum making, my future. There are a lot of cool things about being who I am, and meth isn't one of them.
Learn more at ncai.org. A message from the Partnership for a Drug-Free America and the National Congress of American Indians. Who am I? Am I Indian? Just 'cause I'm a girl from the res, don't make things up about me. What if I move away? Then who am I? Some kids try meth just to escape, but then I think about my grandma, my little brother, my beadwork, my poetry, and I think, I like who I am, and I know meth is not for me.
Check out ncai.org, a message from the Partnership for a Drug-Free America and the National Congress of American Indians.
Okay, we're back here on Mvskoke Radio here on the Brew. Sitting in, of course, is Morgan Taylor, who's actually been working this story, correct?
Yes, I have. I've been working with Secretary of the Nation, Tara Branson Thomas. I believe she's on the line.
You with us, Ms. Thomas? Hello? Okay, well, let's see here. We're going to try. Here we go. Try that one. Are you with us, Ms. Thomas?
Yes, I have Zach Harjo too with me.
Okay, great. Now, if we can keep all of our buttons punched correctly, I think we will have a show here. We're going to let our colleague here, Morgan Taylor, take the lead on this segment. So we'll turn it over to her.
Our nation has been granted some coronavirus funds for Creek business owners, and Miss Branson Thomas is the facilitator of this. Tara, would you mind introducing yourself?
Sure, my name's Tara Branson Thomas. I'm the Secretary of the Nation in Commerce, and I also have Zachariah Harjo, who's our Special Projects Coordinator here in the Secretary of the Nation's office.
Awesome. Can you guys just each take a little bit of time and explain your role in the coronavirus funds for Creek business owners?
Zach, would you like to go first?
Yeah, sure. So as Tara said, I'm the Project Development Coordinator or Special Projects Coordinator for the Secretary's Office. So the role that I have in general is typically organizing and coordinating a lot of the different projects that stem from economic development and business development within the nation. And then specifically for CARES Act, I've been working a lot with the Citizen-Owned Business Relief Program, originally on the committee to review and process applications, but now we've kind of switched gears, and I'm the primary contact and then support personnel on it. I'm working through all the files and answering phone calls. So typically, my role is to really kind of coordinate between all of the businesses and citizens that are interested in applying, getting all of their documents organized and putting them together and complete applications so that when we do submit them to the review committee, which includes Secretary Branson, that there's a high likelihood that everything that we put in is going to be approved, and that we're not submitting things that are going to be rejected or that there's going to be questions about the expenses.
So you help guide the applicant through the application process and make sure everything's correct?
Yes.
Okay. And Ms. Branson, what is your role in the grant?
Sure. So I really want to commend Zach on his efforts, and previous to Zach, Edith Baker was helping applicants, and that's been a really pivotal role as it moves through the final approval process here at the nation, because we've learned, over this time period, how unique businesses are in Mvskoke Creek Nation, and how we can be flexible in helping them meet some of their goals and really survive the pandemic and the impacts that the pandemic have had. And so Zach and Edith have both played really pivotal roles, and my role is really kind of towards the end. I'm the final approval person, so all the communication comes from our office with my signature on it, and really just here to support the process and the citizens and be an advocate for them, knowing kind of the policy and what other tribes have done has helped us communicate and counsel with applicants so that they can maximize this opportunity during what is otherwise kind of a difficult time for small businesses in both Oklahoma and across the nation.
Okay, so you guys were given quite a bit of funding for this particular grant, correct?
Yeah, so total the budget was for $7.5 million.
And what does that allow an applicant to receive?
So every Mvskoke Creek citizen-owned business is eligible for a $50,000 grant opportunity. So they work with Zach and others to identify expenses that they've incurred as a result of the pandemic, and then any expenses that they could incur in the future in order to kind of change their business model or continue to respond to the pandemic. So we kind of have some flexibility about how those funds can be spent. I would say the vast majority of applicants often apply for service support for their lease agreements or rental responsibilities or ongoing kind of fixed costs, so utilities. And then, of course, everyone is eligible to apply for funds related to additional PPE that is necessary in order to keep the business open or to continue to serve their clientele.
Okay, and what are some of the eligibility criteria for this grant?
Zach, would you like to go over that?
Yeah. So there are three main eligibility criteria. And the first and foremost is that it has to be a tribal citizen that's currently enrolled with the nation, and they also have to be the majority owner or operator of the business. And I know there's a lot of confusion with that, and we've had a lot of interest and requests from couples, or they operate a business and it's just the husband and wife, or the two spouses. And if there's no delineation between your paperwork that says it's 51-49, or that the Indian citizen in the marriage is the majority owner, unfortunately, that the 50-50 split that a lot of people come with interest in, it would not qualify. So the applicant has to be a Creek citizen, and it has to be a majority owner, 51% or over. Or, if there's if there's like three partners, they have to be the majority owner. So that's the first rule. The second rule is they have to have been in business for 12 months prior to the pandemic. And there's a number of ways to demonstrate that, but the easiest way is typically if you have reported taxes, if you have a tax return, if you have a business EIN. Pretty much what that is necessary for is, that's the legislation that Congress wrote, is, the 12 months prior for it to be eligible for the grant application. But also, if there is no business activity associated either with a business EIN or a tax number, when you go to file taxes next year, there's going to be a number of issues if you are awarded funding illegally and you were not in business for the 12 months prior, because that'll pull up a number of red flags saying that this was federal money distributed to an ineligible applicant because they weren't in business for 12 months. So that's really important.
Excuse me, this is Gary Fife here. Let me jump in with this question. I know that's kind of sitting in the middle of my mind here. Now, we talked about ownership and things like that, and so these sound like safeguards that are put in place to prevent the minority front fake ownership kind of thing that has happened in the past. Is that what we're talking about there?
Typically, yeah. And
yeah, go ahead, Zach.
And we're not the only entity or tribal government that is kind of beholden to these same type of requirements, but it is pretty across the board, and a lot of it is to kind of safeguard against people using a sort of minority entity or person to qualify for federal funding that they otherwise would not qualify for.
Okay, so I know that when I had done this story, I had talked to Charlie James with Catherine's Flowers, and she's kind of an example of a business who used this funding. So can we kind of talk about maybe some of the things that would have been used for in her business, if that's not like crossing a line?
Or maybe give some examples, Zach, of some of the more unique businesses that we've helped.
Yeah, so I can't, I won't specifically speak about Catherine's Flowers, but a number of businesses that we've helped are lawn care, where people have had multiple businesses, where we've had one where their primary business is, one where they have an EIN in the business set up, but they also own or operate a kind of a side thing where they've demonstrated that they pay taxes on it. It's reported, and so we've kind of worked through a number of different applications where basically, as long as you have a business practice that the IRS is aware of, and you're able to defend it, and you pay taxes on it, or you pay some sort of business-related costs, profit and loss expenses that you can demonstrate, that will typically qualify. But some of the more unique situations are cattle. I know cattle, for instance, some people do have LLCs to operate kind of home, ranch, and agriculture businesses. Some people don't. But that's one where it can be pretty. We have to kind of get really creative with how, because if I'm looking at it for me as a citizen that needed help, I would say, even if I didn't have an LLC, I would still feel like I qualified if I could demonstrate, well, I spend $50,000 a year on the cattle, feeding them and doing this and this. I might know that there's a certain cost that is associated with doing that type of business practice, but I may not have all of the paperwork up front, or I may not know all of that. So that kind of helps where those type of business owners, we have a conversation and really kind of get down to the nitty gritty and talk about, what exactly expenses, how can we document your business that will pass an audit, or that is what the nation feels comfortable kind of moving forward with. So there's been, like I said, cattle ranches. Those present some pretty interesting applications, as well as hair salons and hairstylists. A lot of independent contracting, where people, they might have been artists, or they might have done some writing and stuff, but because of conferences being shut down, or art shows, or whatever type of things aren't happening because of the pandemic, they have nowhere to kind of sell their product, or they have no medium to promote themselves. So working with a lot of independent contractors has led to a number of very different requests. Mm-hmm. But the things that they've requested funding for are, website development. Therefore, if, for instance, we had people in the Tulsa area that had salons, and the city had a mandate, where they were forced to close for a period of at least 30 days to 2 months. And in that, there was a letter stating that any product that was, open to public consumption, or if you had anything that was, within the line of sight for the public, they had to get rid of, or anything that had an expiration date that had been opened, everything had to be, totally discarded. So in that instance, we were able to use CARES Act funding for a number of different salon, independent contractors or owners, where they not only lost product because they had to close their business. They probably also lost product because some of the product expired during the closure, but then they also incurred additional expense to repurchase all of those items, and as well as safety, PPE, or sanitation, all of those items that they need to reopen now in the pandemic era. So that's like 3 costs associated with closing, and those are things that people don't typically think about. But under the CARES Act, we found that those are all allowable costs. So we've had to get kind of, like I said, really creative, particularly helping independent contractors and people that don't have LLCs or formal corporation documents, but that still do have a legitimate business practice.
Okay, so we're really trying to utilize all the funds here. What are some examples of things that are not covered by this grant?
So the number one thing that people typically apply for, and that unfortunately just is not going, that under most circumstances will not be allowable, is payroll, or for typical business expenses like restaurants. I had to keep up my liquor license and, all these other health and safety certifications, even though we were closed. We had to close, for the month of April or whatever, and I had to pay all these things. So we get a lot of kind of invoices or receipts of things like that. But unfortunately, what the legislation states and how we've kind of interpreted and been creative with the guidance from Treasury or from the IRS is that those expenses are incurred no matter no matter what. So if the expense is incurred during normal business, whether there's a pandemic or not, whether we're going through all the things or the closures, those expenses are typically ineligible. So payroll, anything that a business typically is expected to pay, like if they offer health insurance, none of those are going to be allowable typically under the CARES Act. The only way that those payroll could be allowed is if, like for instance, like a restaurant that was primarily dine-in after the pandemic, they reopened, and then now they have a new position where they have someone that's handling strictly online or mobile orders. That is a situation where we could approve a payroll, but most people, when they read the application, they think that, I can demonstrate a revenue loss. I've lost 90% of my business, so I'm going to request the full $50,000 and say, produce my payroll reports from March until December and say that I need $50,000 to do payroll. Unfortunately, you're required as a business to do your payroll no matter what. That's a normal expense, and that isn't allowable. So what I tell people mostly is if they have a business location, a site location, the grant funding can certainly pay for rent and utilities. So when they're building their budget request, to start there, to start with things that we know are going to be typically approved and allowed. And then after that, if you're still well under that 50,000 threshold and you're wanting to request as much as you're eligible for, then we can kind of get creative and talk about, if I'm going to be adapting in the virtual world, I'm going to need new business cards. If I'm going to be doing more online marketing, I'm going to need my website to have an online payment portal. Those are things that you can request funding for, but typically because businesses come and when they're applying, they're very kind of, and I totally understand, they're very desperate, or they need the money yesterday. Everyone does.
Right.
But unfortunately, we have to do so in a manner that is beneficial for them in the long run, and is also beneficial for the nation, because we're not trying to have anyone have the IRS knocking at their door next year.
It's kind of a long application process, correct?
It is, and I think that's one of the other things that's been both frustrating, but also it's necessary, particularly because we opened up our application process to citizen-owned businesses outside of the state. And what a lot of people are unaware of, and unfortunately I worked with the tax program this past year, so I have a much more developed understanding of it, is the taxation process is something that we as a tribal government have to be incredibly cautious of. And to even offer the business relief program outside of the state, where the tribe does not have, any guaranteed jurisdiction outside of Oklahoma to provide tribal members with relief, we're really kind of hoping that the IRS will, or any federal agency that's auditing how we've used the CARES Act, will see that we've documented this relief program truly as we've documented and we've tailored it in the same way that any other type of federal funding should or would be pursued. And so under that guidance, that we hope that when Treasury and IRS go to process taxes next year, that they're not going to consider whatever distribution that a Creek Nation-owned business receives in Oregon, that they're not going to be consider that as taxable income, but that distribution was purely for COVID relief and response, and that us as a tribal government have the authority to issue those type of assistance and payments to tribal citizens outside of our borders. So that's what we're hoping, but we have no idea if that will actually pan out. So unfortunately, the other reality that we're faced with is because the tribe is kind of we operate in Oklahoma, we don't know if the state of California or the state of Oregon or the state of Texas is going to raise an issue along with the IRS about citizens in their state receiving a distribution from the tribe.
Okay.
So those are all, and that's partially why I think the documentation process and the application is as long as it is because we're trying to safeguard in every way that we can to make sure that this is appropriate use of federal funds. And as long as it's appropriate use of federal funds, we're hoping to avoid any sort of tax issues next year for any business that receives relief funds.
Okay. Thank you for that. So when it comes to these funds and most CARES Act funding, they have to be expended by a certain date, right?
They do, yes. And that's the other, as of right now, we don't have a deadline for when businesses can or should stop applying. I would say that the hard deadline or a soft deadline, I should say, would be probably the end of November at the very latest.
The final deadline for the tribe to distribute funds is December 30th. And so we are encouraging businesses to apply, in the next 30 days or so that there's time to go through this longer-term application process and then to get the money out. The backup, the back end of the application is that we actually have to collect receipts for the expenses that are incurred as a result of the application to the grant. And so how the process is working now, once an application is approved, we provide an 80% award check. And then when you send your receipts in for that 80%, we distribute the final 20%. So it is kind of an iterative process that does take a little bit of time even after the award so that we can document those expenses properly. So we are encouraging businesses, no matter where they are, to go ahead and submit applications as soon as they can so we can start that process and get the awards done as quickly as possible because the funds have to be committed before December 30th.
Okay, have you guys had a lot of applicants, and do you have funding for many more?
We do have enough funding for probably about 100 more businesses at the maximum amount. What we've started to see is that those businesses that wanted the maximum amount came in pretty early, and now we're having smaller businesses with just less cash flow come in the door, so the awards are getting smaller. So we definitely have funding available. We are processing applications as quickly as we can and trying to move forward with the applications that we have so that we can sort of identify how much funding may be available towards the end of the year.
Okay, Tara, I think this is a great program. And how might one apply?
So the best way to apply is to reach out to Mr. Harjo. You can email him at Harjo, Horjo, at ncn-nsn.gov and request an application, do an initial interview with Zach. Those tend to be pretty fruitful. And then you can submit documents electronically or a hard copy to Zach to the P.O. Box 580 in Okmulgee, Oklahoma, 74447.
Okay, and when I spoke with Edith Baker, she said, apply, we want to give the money out, so everybody needs to apply.
Yes, we are working very hard. Like Zach said, we're working with every client to really think about their business and how we can best support them during the pandemic, and we really hope that this is a successful venture for those small businesses during this time.
All right, Tara, that's all the questions I had today. I appreciate you coming on. I know it was short notice, so thank you very much.
No problem. Thank you for your patience with our technical problems.
Have a good day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Okay, wonderful. Nice interview.
Yeah.
There seem to be a lot of possibilities there for people to get some support.
Yeah, and like I said, when I had wrote this story, I spoke with a business owner. Her name was Charlie James. She owns Catherine's Flowers in Ada, Oklahoma, and she reiterated to me that her doors would not be open if it had not been for this grant. So, really good stuff.
Well, that's kind of a complicated process, it would seem, and it's not easy to get the grant. You've got to be a real legitimate business with certain expenses that are not going to be allowed. Well, anyway, let's get out of here. Nice job today. This is Gary Fife, Jaho Difkados. Mado, Mabu Hedgetscut.
Mado.
You've been listening to Mvskoke Radio. Join us again next week for more local, tribal, and community news and updates. Mado.